Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. I'm Christine Ott, the Development Director at APA, and I'm joined today by my APA colleagues Ryan Scherzinger, Programs Manager with the Professional Practice Team, and Joe DeAngelis, Research Associate with the Hazards Planning Center. We will be discussing the APA Foundation's Disaster Recovery Request for Proposals and look forward to hearing from all of you. Before we dive into the presentation, let's review a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. We'll post a copy of the webinar recording on the Disaster Recovery RFP information page, planning.org/foundation/RFP. Everyone who registered for the webinar will also be emailed a copy of the recording. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation by using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And we've saved the second half of our session to respond to your questions and concerns. If we're not able to answer all the questions this afternoon, we will respond to questions in writing, adding to the FAQ section on the information page. All questions we receive, even if we respond this afternoon, will be added to our FAQ page. And if you think of others after the webinar, please don't hesitate to email us at foundation@planning.org. If you haven't checked out the RFP information page, please do so. All forms referenced during this presentation are available to download. And as I've mentioned, we are keeping our FAQ page updated. Okay, let's get started. So, as you may know, APA relaunched the APA Foundation last year at NPC, and the the mission is to advance the art and science of planning through philanthropic activities that provide access to educational opportunities, enrich the public dialogue about planning, and advance social equity in the profession and in our communities. It's also included in APA's 501c3 status. Foundation activities are implemented through three priority areas, which I'll go into a little more deeply on the next few pages. They are research, scholarships, and community assistance. The research priority area provides planners with evidence-based tools and will include the development of a strategic research agenda for the entire planning profession. We'll be hosting a convening of planners, researchers, academics, and partners in 2019, so stay tuned for more details on that. The Foundation also awards scholarships. We are currently accepting applications to the Judith McManus Price and Charles Abrams scholarships now through June 1st. If you know of a planning student, please encourage them to apply. We will be awarding $25,000 in scholarships this fall. And of course, why we are here today, community assistance. The Foundation is partnering with APA's Community Planning Assistance Team, CPAT, program to support communities in disaster-devastated communities. And as you have seen in the RFP, to support planners in building the skills they need to foster community resilience. Before we move to the RFP, we wanted to share more about this funding opportunity. We will be awarding a little over $53,000 through this RFP, and these funds are a combination of individual donations from APA members and a match from the APA Foundation. This is an exciting opportunity and the very first grant-making program for the APA Foundation. We'll be piloting how the Foundation will provide community assistance and hope this will be the first of many opportunities for communities to apply for support. Because we raised these funds through our disaster recovery fundraising appeal in 2017, we need to honor the intentions of our donors. As you have likely noticed in the RFP, we are focusing on the 2017 disaster season, the hurricanes, floods, mudslides, and wildfires. Our donors gave with the understanding that their dollars would be invested in communities impacted by those disasters. We do not know how many awards we will make or the award amounts. As we move through the RFP guidelines today, you'll see that this is an inclusive approach to grant making. We hope to support individual planners as well as communities, and will make grants based on the requests we receive. We also know that the need in disaster-devastated communities far outweighs the funds available. The costs of these disasters are enormous, and we know that these grants will be modest. We hope that they will be a catalyst for you and your communities, and we also want you to know that we continue to talk to other potential funders. We hope to be able to support more projects in the future. So let's take a look at the RFP itself. If you haven't had a chance to visit the RFP information page, please do so. You will find 3 forms available to download: Request for Proposals, Appendix A, and Appendix B. The FAQ page I've mentioned is also available at the link I mentioned earlier, planning.org/foundation/RFP. Now, for eligible requests, we took this language right out of the RFP, so there's no real need to take notes. We've offered guidance on eligible requests. As you'll see, all of these request types are designed to support capacity building, individuals or communities, and are meant to be a flexible framework, allowing you to craft proposals that meet your needs and the needs of your communities. What this also means is that a uniform approach to our grant making does not work. For example, it may just take a couple of months for an individual to attend a training and then report back to the foundation, but it might take 6 months for a chapter to design a workshop, and of course the cost will be higher. And as we'll learn from Ryan later, we know that CPATs can take 9 months or more to complete. If you are awarded a grant, you will work with a member of APA staff to decide on reporting deadlines, develop an action plan for your award, and make sure we are tracking the dollars and activities appropriately. We also know that things change, and that's okay. We anticipate the plans will be adjusted throughout the project period. As we've discussed, and you can see referenced in that first paragraph, all funds must support planners in communities declared by FEMA as disasters during the 2017 disaster season. This is restricted to major disaster declarations. If you're unsure if your community qualifies, you can visit the FAQ section on the RFP information page, and there's a link to FEMA Disaster Declaration website, where you'll be able to search for your community. Again, because we ask members to donate to support hurricane flooding, wildfire, and mudslide relief, we are prioritizing communities impacted by Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, as well as communities impacted by the California wildfires. So let's take a deeper dive into our eligible requests and talk about CPATs. I'll pass things over to Ryan now to share more about our CPAT program.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. The Community Planning Assistance Teams Program, or CPAT for short, is designed to provide planning support to underserved communities. Senior level planning professionals volunteer their time and expertise to work with communities around the U.S. and abroad on a focused planning project. Teams are assembled based on the needs of the community's unique set of challenges. Communities receive the time and expertise of the team and the time of APA staff who coordinate the project with the local host, which could be the local government, a nonprofit, or other key local organizations such as a community development corporation. Communities are responsible for covering travel costs and any other costs related to the project, typically speaking for the CPAT program. However, with the RFP proposal, we are accepting within that proposal the request for additional funding from this RFP process. And a general cost, as you'll see from the CPAT proposal included in the appendices for the RFP, are generally somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 for travel costs. Teams are capable of addressing a wide range of issues. APA has around 40,000 members with a broad variety of expertise. Teams often include experts in other fields such as landscape architecture and urban design, or other specialties as needed. Obviously, for projects related to this RFP, proposals must focus on disaster recovery, but that may still include a variety of expertise needs depending on the context. Projects must be focused enough for a team of 4 to 5 volunteers to address the mix of elements in a meaningful way. Study areas are most often at the neighborhood scale, smaller downtowns, or well-defined corridors. Larger geographic scales are also possible, but with a tighter issue focus. The best way to gauge the scale and scope of work of a CPAT project is to review the final reports from past completed projects. And those reports are available on the CPAT webpage, which is planning.org/CPAT. One notable project you may want to look at, since it explicitly involved post-disaster recovery, is the Lyons, Colorado project. While your project will obviously have different needs, the Lyons report may prove useful in thinking through your community's proposal. And each CPAT project is as unique as each of the communities that the volunteers teams work with. However, there are some common elements generally found within each CPAT. Community engagement is almost always a key component. Resident and stakeholder participation is critical to the success of realizing a community's vision. Teams often include designers who can help visualize the change a community seeks. An implementation strategy that helps the community stay on track toward reaching its short and longer term goals is another key offering by teams. And another important thing that teams try to identify is low-hanging fruit, quick wins, tangible results, positive changes that people in the community can notice and experience in the short term, helps maintain momentum and helps keep the community involved in the longer term efforts. That is a quick scan of what CPAT projects typically involve. I'm happy to entertain any questions at the end of this webinar, as Christine mentioned. I think I turn it back over to Christine now.
Thank you, Ryan. CPATs offer an important way to leverage APA member expertise, your expertise, and to support communities in the disaster recovery process. The remaining types of requests are also designed to build capacity, but focus on individual planners or chapters, building capacity at the professional versus community level. The bolded example here is an opportunity for planners to request support their professional development costs. I want to walk through the selection criteria referenced in this description and available on page 2 of the RFP. You'll see this is a long list, and a quick reminder, this is taken directly from the RFP, so you don't need to take notes on this. These items are really meant to help guide all of the requests, because we anticipate that we will receive many different types of requests, and because we know that each community and each planner has been uniquely impacted by these disasters, we have a very comprehensive list. We ask that you complete the application as thoroughly as possible. Please share as much as you can and what you hope will happen as a result of attending the training or workshop. This list is also how the grant-making committee will evaluate the submissions. Now, if you're a chapter leader or administrator, please consider applying for support to develop your own training or bring in experts you've identified. Please keep the same criteria considerations we just reviewed in mind as you develop your proposal. And then we have, for the final point, this is another opportunity to build professional capacity. For those of you who attended NPC this year, we were excited to have a session about the Dutch dialogues and the ongoing impact of the One Water framework at APA and in the planning community. If you're unfamiliar with the Dutch dialogues were a series of workshops or learning exchanges that facilitated cross-sector information sharing. The Katrina experience in particular shifted the approach to water and disaster recovery. Instead of trying to keep water out, the dialogues discussed how the Dutch live with water, and the workshops identified transferable lessons learned to support a more resilient New Orleans. As mentioned earlier, awarded grantees will work with APA staff members to finalize the details of your scope of work and budget. We will also want you to be aware of our reporting requirements. We really want to be able to report back to our donors and APA members how their dollars contributed to disaster recovery and the impact they made. So please submit all of your application materials, as you'll see on the screen, to foundation@planning.org by June 18th. If you're submitting a CPAT application, we'd also like you to copy cpat@planning.org. Please know that the Foundation Board and its grant-making committee will review all applications thoroughly and will do our best to support you and your communities. So if you haven't already, please submit your questions now and we'll respond to as many as we can. We have gotten a few in, so we'll start with those. One of them is, do you prefer a narrative format or charts and graphs? I guess the answer to this one is, the format isn't really an important factor in the consideration. Really the content of the request and the relevance to some of the things that we mentioned earlier and potential for impact in the community are more important than getting everything in a, looking pretty in a chart or a graph. We know that you'll be getting a lot of information and data from possibly local governments or other local sources. So if you want to just pass that along in the format that you receive it, that will be fine. Okay, I see one up on the screen. We mentioned cross-sector teams for CPATs. Any other recommendations? Local leaders, could I apply to any training? Does it need to be national or local? Well, as far as I can answer the local or national on the training, it doesn't matter if it's national or local. It's just relevant to disaster recovery and something that you feel that you can bring back to your community and assist with. I don't know if we can go back and see the other CPAT question. I'm only seeing the 416 question. Did you catch that one, Ryan?
I think that the question was, I see the end of it in terms of, do chapters need to be involved? Any other recommendations, local leaders? Yeah, so I think from what I understand from the question is that, yes, all CPATs are typically multidisciplinary. It just kind of depends on what the needs are. For the first part of your question, yes. Any other recommendations? Local leaders, yeah. So with the CPAT, it kind of guides you through that with the CPAT community proposal. If you have had a chance to look at that, you'll see that it guides you through all the different things that we're asking for. So local leaders, we're looking for letters of support from any and all people who might be important to that project, whether it be local business leaders, obviously local government agencies who would be involved, kind of et cetera, anybody who would be involved. I mean, we're looking for wide stakeholder participation typically with CPATs. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, Ryan, could you just flesh out a little bit about some of the cross-sector teams that you've put together and what industries you've involved in some CPATs to give them some ideas?
Sure. I have put together, there's, for this kind of thing, there's folks who work as private consultants who do specialize in something in particular. It might be hazard mitigation or something like that. It might be landscape architects who have a specialty in green infrastructure and that kind of thing. It might be, I've had projects where ports were involved and we had to find someone who was specialized in ports as it had to do with the oil and gas industry. It could be as specific as that in some cases. And I see another part of the question is, do chapters need to be involved? We would prefer it if they were involved, I think, but it's not necessarily a requirement. But I think at a bare minimum, we would like for you to reach out to the chapter ahead of submitting the proposal to let them know that you are submitting the proposal. And if you have questions about it, you can ask us about that. If you don't have a direct line to the chapter, that may be something that we may be able to facilitate if we decide to do that project.
And I'll just add to that because I've taken some calls from Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands where we don't have a chapter at this time. And so what we'd recommend is if you're working with other, one example was working with a local university there. We had mentioned a letter of support from the chapter. A letter of support from the local university would be a good substitute for that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, this presentation will be available online at the link that's on the screen right now, the RFP link, and you'll be able to listen to it in the future. Okay, I'm a bit confused about the different types of support. I got that the CPAT application is only for pro bono work, so what kind of funds could a local community apply for under that category? Then there is another category to cover professional expenses of planners to work with communities. Is that correct? In that case, what does professional expenses entail?
Yeah, so professional expenses would be anything really related to the project. So typically CPAT, the expenses would cover travel costs essentially. I mean, it's the hotel, flight, and food, covered by all the volunteers who would volunteer for that particular team. So like I said, those typically are around 10 to 15,000, just depending on where experts are coming from, and how many days the project would take place. So I think what we're saying there for this RFP, we are open to proposals that are requesting funding for all of those costs or part of those costs. So if there is a community that you can put in a certain amount of money and you're asking the foundation to cover the rest of those costs, then we are open to both kinds of proposals, depending on your needs as a community.
Okay. So another question that we had that came in was, does the project have to include APA members, AICP, or can any planner be involved? And the answer to that is we've kept it broad. So any planner can be involved, whether they're an APA member or AICP designated. Another question we had was about a ranking system and how we'll determine awardees. We'd like you to just use the criteria as your guide there. Our grant-making committee will evaluate proposals using the same criteria. We know that not all those criteria will necessarily apply to your project, but if you can answer those questions to the best of your ability, your project, that will be the best approach there. This opportunity was made possible, again, by member donations with a match from the foundation, so we want to really be able to report back to those donors how their contributions made an impact in the communities that were affected. Another question that we had that came in was, could APA funding be leveraged with another funding source or grant? And yes, it's not a problem to leverage APA's investment with other funding support that you might have in your community. If you were requesting $10,000 from APA, for example, and have identified a local funder to support your proposed CPAT at $10,000 for a total project of $20,000, that's great, although that's higher than what Ryan said most projects usually would cost for those travel expenses. But it would be good to let us know in your application that you have those other funds that you're going to be leveraging with the APA funds. I see we've got a couple more writing questions. You mentioned previous CPAT reports. Is this the first time the foundation has supported CPATs? Are there other examples you recommend we read?
So the last time the foundation had a campaign to raise money, which did go towards what was then the Planning Assistance Team program. It's a bit different now. It's much more of the program is much more established at this point. However, we did have teams that were involved post-Katrina, and we did 4 of them. And those reports are also available on the CPAT page. I wouldn't necessarily say that those reports are any more or less better to read than other ones, depending on what type of project you have. Lions was a much more recent version of what we do for CPAT. However, the ones that they did during Katrina were also very good as well. Are there other examples you recommend we read? Like I said, CPAT, or maybe I didn't say it, but CPAT obviously isn't solely, the projects aren't solely about post-disaster recovery. So the list of projects that we have on the CPAT page are not all about disaster recovery. However, since disaster recovery could include a number of things, the projects are very broad in terms of the types of things that teams have looked at in the past that might have an element that includes something that your project includes. So it just kind of depends. If you were to go through each project and look for an element of which might relate to yours, it's tough to say without knowing more information about what your particular project is. But in terms of what we've done lately, Lyons, Colorado, and then Franklin, Tennessee is the other one that we've done recently that was not in an immediate post-disaster recovery, but it was disaster related and hazard mitigation related. Those 2, in terms of the past 5 years that we've done, are 2 to look at, and then beyond that, the 4 that we did post-Katrina are also very good to look at.
Joe, did you want to add in, it might be helpful for them to know a little bit more where they can get resources on disaster recovery.
Sure. The Hazards Planning Center here at APA, we developed a special page on the APA website that has a fairly large body of resources for planners in affected communities. You can go to planning.org/resources/disaster to access that information. I'd also encourage you to visit the Hazards Planning Center webpage for broader resources. They won't necessarily pertain directly to the types of impacts that happened in your community, but they might help you to sort of to frame your proposals. So I would go to planning.org/national-center/hazards for information there.
Thanks, Joe. Ryan, do you want to take this next one?
Sure. The question is, what is the typical CPAT timeline? I think you mentioned 9 months. Yes, and that is actually spelled out pretty clearly in the CPAT proposal form, which is in the appendix of the RFP. But just to talk really quickly to it, yes, so 9 months from the point at which we agree to move forward with the proposal and the project. So first step is getting a team leader, finding a time to visit and have a site visit that it's usually a day or two. And then from that point, we recruit the rest of the team, which takes several more months. And then there's a full team visit several months after that. And then some time after that to write the final report and finish that process. So typically speaking, 9 months is a good average to say. It could take a little less, could take a little more, but somewhere within that. Sample CPAT budget is also within the CPAT community proposal form. As I said, in between 10 and 15,000, and those cost. The sample budget helps you think through most of the costs. And like I said, most of that, the bulk of it is flights, hotel, and food. There may be some other costs that you think about, and some typical ones that we put into the sample budget for you to think about. So I would refer to that. And if you have additional questions after taking a look at that, happy to help with you.
Yeah, and I would imagine if there's some connections in the community with a local hotel or a restaurant that could maybe offer some pro bono, that could take the budget down a little bit too. So
yes.
I'm going to answer this question about, would multi-day workshops by the chapter be eligible? Do we need a minimum number of participants? Very good questions. They would be eligible. We don't have a minimum set, so propose away. Can we use other data sources or only FEMA data for the submission?
I can probably answer this one. FEMA data is great. I would encourage you, though, to look elsewhere for sources, too. And, any federal sources that do post-disaster work, obviously NOAA would be fine. Local data, I think, is also really important. So if you have any data that your local planning department, your GIS office, whoever it is, that they've gathered post-storm, I think that would be fantastic. It'd probably be even more well-suited for, your local context than federal data. I don't want to discourage you from using federal data. I think it'd be fantastic to use that too.
Great. Please confirm that you said it would be a good idea to talk to your local chapter and let them know we're planning to submit a grant. Absolutely. Please do that. Please inform your local chapter and where possible, get a letter of support. Yes, you can submit your application early. Absolutely. The deadline is June 18th, but you can submit it any time between now and then. Do we have a list of approved trainers for a potential chapter workshop? We don't have a list of approved trainers here. So again, propose away. Could we review the list of reporting requirements again? That would be if we go back on our slides. Thank you for going back. So ultimately, we want to look at, if you see the slide in front of you, you want to focus on these 6 bullet points, okay? We want to understand how and when the project is implemented. We would like to have data on its scope and impact of the implementation activities, how the budget was actually spent versus budgeted, the number of people and communities impacted by the project. We'd like to have letters from key community stakeholders on the impact. Before and after photos are very important, and local media stories and videos. And if you can think of something else that we didn't think of that would be, helpful in this area, again, we want to encourage creative ideas. We're being very broad in this proposal. We're giving you a lot of things to think about, but we don't by any means think we thought of everything, because we aren't in your community and don't know exactly what you need and what resources you have available. Is there a particular focus on international proposals? No. The focus is simply on, as we said earlier, the disasters that happened starting in, I think it was August through December of 2017. Did we miss one?
Yeah,
Let's see. Oh, great. Thank you. Do we need to have the assessment complete before the submission? I'm assuming they mean the community or
I can answer that in terms for CPAT. If you had particular questions about CPAT and wanted us to take a look at a draft for some feedback, I think we'd be willing to do that as we normally do through the CPAT program. I'm not sure about what the process will be for other parts of this RFP, but for CPATs, I can answer yes, we'd be willing to take a look. That, again, doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the request, but of course, willing to answer questions like, do you have the scope down correctly? Is this something that a team could handle over 4 or 5 days? Basic questions like that, we'd be happy to take a look at.
And I'd refer you back to the email addresses that we gave you earlier. There's the foundation@planning.org for non-CPAT questions, and then CPAT@planning.org for CPAT questions. And Ryan and I will be handling those requests as they come in. I see we have another question here. Will there be funds to raise data?
If you mean to, gather data to use in your data gathering, exercises as a community, I would say that sounds like it could be part of whatever the proposal would be, whether that's, quantitative data, qualitative data, whatever it might be. I could see it definitely coming into play as part of a, public engagement process or something like that you might be doing to gather. So, I hope that's a helpful answer.
This question is, are the CPAT teams selected by the APA Foundation, or should they be identified already as part of the proposal? Can they be local planners in the affected communities? The question is no. This would follow the normal CPAT process in terms of us putting together the teams. However, we are open to folks if you have people in mind. But no, generally speaking, the planners shouldn't necessarily be identified within the proposal. But if there are important people who should be involved in projects, and there's a really good reason for that, then you should definitely spell that out. But part of the CPAT program, the impetus behind the program is that you're getting an unbiased view from a third party as a CPAT comes into a community, and that's part of why this program exists. That doesn't mean that local stakeholders aren't important. They obviously are, but it's also to get an outside perspective from the team. So if there's a reason why that needs to be a part of your proposal, we're all ears, but typically speaking, that's not a part of how CPATs work.
We have another question, a recommendation that we want to share with you just in putting your budgets together. So it might be helpful to identify what specific portions of your budget would be costing. For example, if you're proposing a complex project for a total budget of $25,000, it will be helpful for the grant-making committee to understand if there are specific components that could be funded. So if the $25,000 is actually 5 discrete $5,000 components, please let us know, because we anticipate this will be a somewhat competitive review process, and we may not be able to support a $25,000 request, but could support perhaps one of the $5,000 components, for example. When will the grant decisions be made? If we are awarded, when will we know? Great question. So we anticipate that it will take a couple of months to gather these proposals, have them reviewed and voted on. So I'd say the best estimate would be late August, would be when those decisions would be made. And then we'd be notifying the grantees who have, who we will be making awards to, and then following up on next steps, who on the AP staff they'll be working with and all of that, and setting the timelines and such, and we'll let those who weren't accepted know as well. Are there any other questions from the group? If we don't see any other questions in the next minute or so, we may wrap this up a little early. And as I said before, this is all going to be available to listen to again at the link that's on the screen right now with the RFP at the end of it. We know we weren't able to communicate this out in all the channels we'd like to, so feel free to share this with any of your colleagues who are interested. You know, we welcome any additional questions to the email addresses that we recommended. We'll be posting some of these great questions and our answers on the FAQ portion of the website that we referred to earlier, so that you can come back and check on those answers as well. But we really hope that you'll all consider putting together a proposal. We'd love to get as many proposals as possible and be able to help as many communities as possible with disaster recovery. So we thank you so much for your time today. Thank Ryan and Joe for your participation, and good luck to you.